My name is Morgan Hayes, and I am 32 years old. I live in the windswept coastal town of Driftwood Cove, Oregon, where the evergreen pines lean toward the salty Pacific, and the morning fog drifts in like a silent visitor. In winter, the cold air carries the tang of seaweed and driftwood. In summer, gulls wheel overhead, crying out among the fishing boats bobbing in the harbor. Driftwood Cove is the sort of place where the grocery clerk knows your coffee order before you speak, and the church bells ring clear across the silent streets. Yet for me, life here has always been a careful balancing act between gratitude for the community's warmth and a gnawing ache of being unseen within my own family. I was born to Karen and Randall Hayes, who ran the town's only bookstore, a snug little shop called the Hidden Chapter. My mother catalogued new arrivals with near religious devotion. My father lost himself in dusty volumes at the back counter. They were passionate about literature, but divorced themselves completely from parenting. I was their firstborn, but they treated me as an unpaid assistant, shelving novels, wielding the ladder to reach top shelves, straightening up the reading nook by the bay window. My younger sister, Elise, and brother Theo both seemed to enjoy far more of their attention. Elise, 2 years my junior, charmed customers with her quick wit, while Theo, 5 years younger, tormented us all with endless pranks that earned him indulgent laughs from Mom and Dad. From an early age, I knew how to tie Theo's shoelaces and read to him at bedtime. By the time I was 8, I even understood the cash register better than my father. Still, when report cards arrived, my straight-A average in science and poetry elicited only a distracted, "That's nice, Morgan. Can you sweep the floor now?" I taught myself not to hope. My parents' pockets were full of books, but their hearts seemed perpetually closed to me. Birthday celebrations were reserved solely for Elise's dramatic parties, fairy tale castles crafted from cardboard, glitter invitations, a troop of her classmates in tutus. Meanwhile, my 12th birthday came and went with a half-eaten muffin and a languid hug from Dad as he muttered, "You're growing up fast. No need for cake." I hid my tears behind the counter, telling myself I didn't need family approval. But that sting lodged in my memory like a needle that never dulls. Despite the emptiness at home, I found solace in the harbor. I learned to sail on my own, first in a battered dinghy Dad kept for his rare day off, then in a sleek sailboat I restored with my own hands. The wind became my confidant, the rolling waves my therapist. I celebrated small victories alone, catching my first halibut, saving enough from my part-time job at the Hidden Chapter to buy a battered tide pool guide. Yet I never stopped longing for a hand on my shoulder, a word of pride spoken just for me. That longing persisted until the summer I turned 21, when I first saw Saga Thompson at the annual Driftwood Cove Arts Fair. She was painting seascapes under the weathered pavilion, her long auburn hair tied back in a loose braid, a bright canvas of crashing waves at her easel. When our eyes met, I felt a warmth I'd never known. She smiled, beckoning me over to watch her brush dance across the canvas. In her presence, I realized that someone could see me, and that my story was not yet finished. Meeting Sage that sunny afternoon beside her easel changed everything for me. After I introduced myself, she offered me a swatch of ultramarine paint and invited me to add a brushstroke to her canvas. Our fingers brushed, and for a moment the salty breeze held its breath. We talked about everything under the sky, the shifting colors of the sea, her childhood on a cranberry farm 60 miles inland, and my dream of writing a book one day. By dusk, as the fair's lanterns winked on, she pressed a paint-stained card into my palm with her number scrawled on the back. My heart felt as if it might leap right out of my chest, and I chanced to smile that she returned 100-fold. Over the next weeks, we fell into each other's routines. I brought her coffee from the cafe near the pier. She surprised me with sketches of the lighthouse at sunrise. We wandered the pebbled beach at dawn and explored overgrown trails behind the bookstore, talking about our dreams and regrets. She confided that art had always been her refuge after losing her father to a fishing accident when she was just 8. I confessed how I learned to sail alone, craving the solitude the ocean offered me, and how I once felt invisible in my own home. Sage said she had never felt unseen beside me. She saw every layer of who I was, and it thrilled me to my core. By the time blackberry blossoms filled the hedgerows in June, we both knew this was real. I asked her to dinner at Harbour View Inn, where we shared clam chowder and a slice of lemon cake, laughing at our awkward first moments together. Then I stood on tiptoe and kissed her beneath a string of fairy lights, the summer night wrapped around us like a warm blanket. She whispered, "I love you, Morgan." And I replied, "I love you, Sage," as if those words were the most precious things either of us had ever said. That autumn, beneath a canopy of crimson maples, I proposed. I brought her back to the spot where we first met at the Arts Fair Pavilion. In my jacket pocket lay a ring I'd commissioned from a local silversmith, a simple band entwined with waves. My hands trembled as I knelt in the crisp October air and asked her to marry me. She nodded through happy tears, and I slipped the ring onto her finger as seagulls cried overhead. We married the following spring in a ceremony at Driftwood Cove's old chapel, with 20 of our closest friends and family gathered under pastel banners. Sage wore a dress of seafoam silk, and I wore a navy suit embroidered with a tiny anchor on the lapel. When she walked down the aisle toward me, her canvas bouquet in hand, time itself seemed to stand still. Our officiant was old Mrs. Caldwell, the minister who'd christened me 32 years earlier. She blessed our union and told us to cherish laughter, kindness, and the promise of tomorrow. Not long after, Sage and I discovered we were expecting. The day she told me, she cradled her hands over her stomach and said, "We're going to have a little artist of our own." I swore my knees turned to jelly. Over the next 9 months, I learned to braid her hair when she felt queasy, to cook ginger tea, and to read bedtime stories to her growing belly. We painted the nursery a soft coral with driftwood shelves for books and seashell mobiles above the crib. When our daughter, Riley June Hayes, was born on a foggy August morning, her first cry echoed through the hospital corridor like music. Saig held her close and whispered, "Welcome to the world, little one." I kissed Riley's forehead and felt that same fierce warmth I'd felt when I first saw Sage's painting. In that moment, I vowed to protect Riley with every breath, no longer content to be the invisible helper at home, but ready to be her steadfast guardian, just as Sage had become mine. Life with little Riley settled into a rhythm that felt both miraculous and utterly exhausting. Sage and I took turns feeding her midnight bottles, rocking her to sleep in the creaking glider I'd refurbished from an old oak chair. Dawn found us sitting side by side on the porch swing, wrapped in blankets, listening to gulls crying overhead as the tide rolled in. Riley's tiny fingers curled around ours, and in her quiet presence we discovered a new kind of peace, one that felt as deep as the ocean itself. I returned to my job at the Driftwood Cove Maritime Museum, cataloguing relics and guiding school groups through exhibits on local shipwrecks. Meanwhile, Saig poured her soul into her art studio down by the pier. She painted every morning, choosing subjects inspired by Riley's wide-eyed wonder: pastel sunrise over the cove, oyster shells on silver sand, the fierce beauty of storm clouds rolling in from the sea. By day's end, she'd sketch images for new canvases, her hands stained with cerulean and cadmium orange. One autumn afternoon, when Riley was nearly 2, Seiji complained of fatigue so profound that she could barely lift her arms. At first, we chalked it up to the long nights and the demands of caring for a toddler. But when she noticed bruises forming on her arms after the gentlest bump, fear pricked my heart. I drove her to the county hospital in Lincoln Bay, where we waited through hours of tests in a sterile corridor suffused with fluorescent light and antiseptic smell. The oncologist delivered the diagnosis in a hushed tone that made the world tilt. Saij had acute leukemia, an aggressive form that demanded immediate treatment. She clutched my hand, her knuckles white, and managed a trembling smile. "We'll get through this," she whispered, though her voice cracked. I nodded, my throat tight, and realized with a surge of despair that the person who had been my anchor in every storm was now adrift in the fiercest gale of her life. Treatment began at once: chemotherapy infusions that sapped her strength, radiation sessions that left her skin raw. Between hospital visits, I juggled museum duties and caring for Riley, who looked up at me with puzzled eyes as I tried to explain why Mommy was so often gone or bedridden. I braided Riley's hair in 2 plaits and laid her head on Sage's pillow, telling her, "Mommy's getting better. She just needs rest." Riley would pat her mother's hand and murmur, "Be brave, Mama." As the weeks passed, our home transformed into a makeshift care center. I installed a hospital bed in the spare room, stocked the kitchenette with protein shakes and bland soup, and learned to administer injections under Sage's gentle guidance. My colleagues at the museum rallied around us, delivering meals and toys for Riley, while Sage's art community organized a benefit show to cover mounting medical bills. Despite the darkness, we found pockets of light. Sage painting soft watercolors from her bed, Riley clapping when her mother smiled at her. Then one November morning, as snowfall dusted the pines, Sage's condition took a swift turn for the worse. Her fever spiked, her breathing grew labored, and she whispered for me to sit beside her. I held her hand tightly, brushing wisps of hair from her forehead, as she breathed her last on the mattress she'd once joked was more comfortable than the couch. In her final breath, she smiled and murmured, "Love Riley well, Morgan. Let her know she's never alone." The stillness that followed was as vast as a calm sea after a storm. I carried Sage to her bed one last time and sat with her until morning light filtered through the curtains. Riley, stirred by my tears, climbed into my lap and pressed her cheek against mine. I rocked us both and sang a lullaby Sage used to murmur, my voice breaking with grief and determination. In that moment, I understood the promise we'd made to each other, to protect Riley with everything we had. Though the shore ahead looked steep and jagged, I resolved to steer us through, just as Sage would have wanted, guided by the echo of her love and the promise of her last words. And so at the age of 32, I embarked on the greatest challenge of all, becoming both mother and father to our daughter, navigating a world forever changed by loss, yet bound together by a bond no sickness could break. The weeks after Sage's passing bled into one another, each dawn greyer than the last. I found myself rising before sunrise, brewing coffee that tasted of ashes, and steeling myself to face a day defined by absence. Driftwood Cove felt emptier, the gulls' cries more hollow. Yet Riley needed me, her small body entwined with mine as we watched the pale dawn light smear across the water. I forced myself to smile, to remind her when she asked, "Where's Mummy?" that Sage was in our hearts always. I leaned on the support network Sage had cultivated. Mrs. Caldwell from the chapel brought casseroles that warmed my belly, while the museum staff volunteered to cover my shifts. Tom, the exhibit curator, quietly took over my responsibilities at the museum on alternating days so I could stay home with Riley. In turn, I let the museum trustees know I would be taking leave. The archives could wait. My priority now was keeping Riley safe, fed, and, above all, loved. Our small home transformed once more. I cleared Sage's paints and easel into storage, afraid that every brushstroke would deepen my sorrow. Instead, I carved out a corner for Riley, a play area strewn with wooden blocks, stuffed seagulls, and a small recorder she'd received as a birthday gift. She'd toddle there, clutching her toy and babble tunes, her bright laughter filling rooms where silence once reigned. One evening, as I tucked Riley into bed, she propped herself onto one elbow and said, "Sing to me, Daddy." My throat tightened. I had no songs memorized beyond lullabies. Yet when I hummed a simple melody Saig used to sing, soft and lilting, Riley's eyes lit up. Then, without prompting, she took her toy recorder and blew a gentle note, perfectly in tune with my humming. My heart lurched. The tiny wail was clear, precise, and carried an uncanny sweetness. It stopped me cold. Over the next days, I watched with astonishment as Riley repeated those notes, coaxing melodies from the recorder that matched my humming pitch and tone. She listened, absorbed, and then responded in kind. One morning, I played a folk tune on my phone, Shenandoah, and she picked out the melody effortlessly on the recorder. Goosebumps prickled my arms. Saichi's spirit seemed to dance in that room, guiding Riley's tiny fingers. Determined to nurture this gift, I cleared a shelf for new sheet music and downloaded simple songs onto my tablet. Each afternoon, after visiting the graveside flowerbed, where I scattered petals from Sage's urn, Riley and I sat in the living room. I would play a bar of melody. She would repeat it. When she hit her first complete phrase of "Over the Rainbow," my vision blurred with tears. It was the song Sage first sang at the arts fair, the song that had made us a family. Word of Riley's ability spread quietly through town. A friend of Mrs. Caldwell's posted a video of Riley playing her recorder at the chapel coffee hour, and people began to whisper, "The little girl with her mother's eyes, channeling an uncanny musical grace." I felt pride, yes, but also trepidation. Fame had come too soon for Riley once, and I feared the glare of attention might scorch her heart. So I resolved to move carefully. I contacted Miss Harper, Sage's former art teacher, now directing Driftwood Cove Elementary's music program, and asked whether Riley could join the after-school ensemble. When Miss Harper heard Riley play, her eyes brimmed with astonishment.
"Morgan," she said, her voice trembling, "this girl's gift, it's extraordinary."
With guidance, she could blossom into something beautiful, something that honors Sage's memory. As Riley skipped off to her first ensemble rehearsal, clutching her recorder, I watched her small silhouette grow braver. In that moment, I realized that though Saigi was gone, her legacy lived on in our daughter's voice. And together, we would learn to carry that legacy forward, one melody at a time. In the weeks that followed Miss Harper's amazement, Riley's afternoons were filled with lilting scales and gentle arpeggios as she joined the after-school ensemble at Driftwood Cove Elementary. Each day, I rearranged my work schedule at the Maritime Museum so I could sweep the exhibit hall in the early morning and then dash home for Riley's pickup. We practiced in our living room, she perched on a cushion with her recorder, and I at the piano, guiding her through each passage. At first, she stumbled over a few notes, her little brow furrowed, but then she found her footing, her breath steady, and the melody blossomed pure as sea spray on a windless dawn. The other children in the ensemble gathered around her in awe, whispering, "How does she play like that?" Their wonder reminded me of the first time I met Saig, when art revealed hidden depths. One rainy Thursday, Miss Harper invited us to perform at the monthly community harbour celebration held in the old boathouse lit by hanging lanterns. The event drew families, fishermen and tourists who came for clam chowder and local crafts. When I told Riley, her eyes widened with excitement and nervous anticipation, her small fingers twisting the recorder strap. "Daddy, what if I make a mistake?" she whispered. I knelt beside her and cupped her face in my hands.
"Sweetheart, every note you play carries love and hope. If your heart is true, so will your music be." She nodded and hugged me tight before stepping onto the stage beneath strings of amber lights. That evening remains vivid in my memory.
The timber beams of the boathouse creaked as the audience hushed, and Riley closed her eyes for a breath. Then she raised the recorder and the first note rang out, crystalline and warm. She played Amazing Grace, adapting it with a delicate folk-style lilt, each phrase caressing the silent crowd like a gentle tide. I stood just off stage, my heart hammering, watching as a single tear traced down Mrs. Caldwell's cheek, and the harbour master lowered his head in reverence. When she finished, the applause swelled like waves crashing on the breakwater, tears and cheers mingling in the musty air. Riley's cheeks flushed with delight as she bowed, and I lifted her into my arms for the curtain call. A local videographer had captured her performance on his phone, and by morning the clip had spread through community groups online. Comments poured in, "She's an angel, Driftwood Cove's treasure, that little girl saved my heart." I watched the view count climb, thousands, then tens of thousands, and my chest tightened with equal measures of pride and protectiveness. I knew we had crossed a threshold. Riley's gift was no longer our secret sanctuary, but a beacon drawing wider attention. I worried that the glare of praise might scorch her innocence, yet I also realized that with each view and share, more people learned about her story, and through her music, about the power of compassion. Over the next weeks, my inbox at Light in the Dark filled with inquiries from school choirs, music camps and charity organizers asking if Riley would perform at benefit concerts. I consulted my lawyer to ensure any offers respected her childhood and our values, brief appearances, modest honoraria, and proceeds earmarked for causes dear to us. Together, Riley and I decided to direct the first round of donations to the Coastal Children's Hospice in Lincoln Bay, a place where kids fought illnesses far more brutal than leukemia. When we delivered a check for $12,000, every cent raised, from the Boathouse concert, Riley's small hand gripped mine as we walked through pastel corridors. A nurse showed us walls painted with rainbows and children's names written like constellations. Riley laid down her recorder and performed Somewhere Over the Rainbow, right there, her eyes shining brighter than any hospital lamp. The children smiled, some clapped, and a few reached out, their frail hands seeking the small miracle she embodied. That day, as we drove home under a sky painted pink by the setting sun, I realized that Riley's gift had given back more to us than music could ever convey. It had revealed life's profound purpose. My daughter had inherited her mother's light, and through each note she taught me that even amid loss, love could carry us across the stormiest seas. And so in a town embraced by ocean winds we forged ahead, father and daughter, ready to face whatever new horizon awaited, guided by the melody of hope she played from her heart. Spring melted into early summer, and Driftwood Cove burst into emerald life once more. Wildflowers carpeted the dunes, and the harbour thrummed with fishing boats, returning with nets full of cod and salmon. Each morning, Riley and I walked the beach before breakfast, her recorder tucked under one arm and a basket of shell charms under the other. We greeted neighbours, Ms. Delgado from the flower shop, who pressed a daisy behind Riley's ear. Old Ben, the retired sea captain, who tipped his cap and declared, "That girl's music could calm a hurricane." Yet beneath the light of these small joys lay a shadow I could no
longer ignore. My parents, Karen and Randall Hayes.
I had not spoken to them since the Thanksgiving gathering, when they had brusquely dismissed Riley's charity check and forced us to leave in anger. But life on the coast has a way of looping back upon itself. One afternoon, as I tuned Riley's recorder in our sunlit kitchen, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, I found my father standing on the threshold, his straw hat in hand, his posture slumped as though the sea breeze had exhausted him. Beside him stood my mother, her eyes red-rimmed and her shopping bag bulging with unopened gifts. "Morgan," my father said, his voice low, "we need to talk." He stepped inside without waiting, and my mother followed, smoothing the creases on her cardigan as though preparing for a trial. My heart twisted. I had hoped they would respect our space, leave us to our healing. Instead, they had come to ask for help. They spoke in clipped tones. The bookstore's rent had doubled, and sales had plummeted since the pandemic. Karen, her voice quavering, admitted that they had tapped every savings account and still faced eviction. Randall looked away as he said, "We heard about Riley's fundraiser. We thought perhaps a fraction of that money could save our shop." He swallowed, as though the words tasted bitter. "You're in a position to help, Morgan." I felt a flicker of anger, pain coursing through me. "Mom, Dad," I began, my hands clenching at my sides, "you once dismissed Riley's gift of $50,000 as a vanity. You laughed at her when she tried to save your failing store." I gestured to the recorder on the table. "That same money she gave you was meant to mend old wounds." You spat on her kindness, on Sage's memory. My mother's shoulders trembled. "We were wrong," she whispered, but there was no conviction in her voice. "Please, Riley needs her home."
"We need ours." I glanced around at our living space, filled with Riley's drawings and her small bookshelf. This home, this sanctuary, was ours alone. When my parents had visited before, they had tried to reclaim me under the guise of family duty.
But I was no longer the overlooked firstborn. I was Riley's father, her protector. Kneeling before them, I looked into their eyes. "I cannot give you money," I said steadily. "Not again. You'll need to face the consequences of your choices, just as I faced mine when I tried to save you with a check you refused." I rose, straightening my shoulders. "I love you both, but I love Riley more."
"I will not let you harm her innocence or our home." My father's jaw clenched. My mother's eyes welled with tears. They turned without another word and stepped back into the afternoon light.
I closed the door gently but firmly, the click of the lock echoing like finality. Inside, I found Riley in the next room, humming a soft tune while lining up her shell charms. She looked up at me, brows furrowed. "Dad, are Grandma and Grandpa mad at us?" she asked, voice small. I knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "They were frightened and asked for help," I said truthfully. "But they forgot how to be kind. Despite that, I want you to know that our family, just you and me, will always be built on love, not on debts or demands." Riley nodded, her eyes bright even in confusion. She placed a shell in my palm, a pale, heart-shaped scallop. I realized in that moment that love was not a matter of bank balances, but of small treasures we chose to keep. And so, as the gulls cried in the distance, I resolved once more to guide Riley through calm waters and storms alike, together forging a family of two that knew the value of unconditional love. News of Riley's boathouse performance spread beyond Driftwood Cove, carried on currents of social media, until it reached the ears of Cascade Public Radio in Portland. One crisp morning in late June, as I balanced Riley on my hip in our sunlit kitchen and she drew seashells in watercolor, my phone buzzed with an email that made my heart stutter. The subject line read, "Invitation to record with Cascade Public Radio." I swallowed, hands trembling. Inside, the host, Marissa Chen, explained how a listener in Lincoln Bay had shared Riley's "Amazing Grace," and it had become the station's most requested recording. They invited her to their Portland studio to lay down a short session, 3 folk songs of her choosing, broadcast on Sunrise Melodies, their flagship morning program. The email concluded with an offer to cover all expenses and to donate any honorarium to our chosen charity. I sank onto a stool, holding the email as though it were a fragile shell. Riley's eyes widened behind me. "Dad, is that real?" she asked, voice soft. I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. "It is, sweetheart. Would you like to sing on the radio?" She jumped up, planting a kiss on my cheek.
Yes! Oh yes, absolutely. Over the next week, I immersed myself in preparation. I reached out to Miss Harper, who generously offered to coach Riley via video calls.
We scheduled music lessons tailored to radio acoustics, emphasizing clear tone, proper mic distance, and subtle dynamics. I researched Cascade Public Radio's studios, a historic brick building on North Broadway, with vaulted ceilings and analog equipment that gave recordings warmth and depth. On the morning of the session, we rose before dawn, boarding the ferry to Port Angeles, then driving south along Highway 101 through towering cedars and winding coastal roads. The world outside our car window glowed with sapphire light as waves crashed against rocky coves. Riley clutched her recorder, her smile luminous in the first rays of sun. Arriving at the station, we were greeted by Marissa, whose enthusiasm matched a child's first carousel ride. She led us through corridors lined with awards and photographs of legendary musicians who had passed through these halls. The main recording room was spacious, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a courtyard of ferns and blackberries. An old, upright piano, varnished but well-tuned, stood in one corner, its keys gleaming. After brief introductions, Marissa showed us to a vocal booth insulated by thick foam panels. She handed Riley a sleek condenser microphone and coached her through a quick sound check. I watched through the glass as Riley stood barefoot on a small rug, her posture straight, her eyes shining with a mixture of nerves and excitement. The engineer queued up a live stream to my phone so I could listen from the control room. "Are you ready, Riley?" Marissa asked through the talkback. Riley took a deep breath and nodded. She began with "Over the Rainbow," her tone pure and unwavering. The microphone captured every nuance, each breath, each gentle punctuation of her voice. I wiped tears as I heard her navigate the melody with the grace of a seasoned performer, her presence filling the booth like sunlight. Next, she played her own composition, Waves of Hope, a simple folk tune she had written for children facing illness. The lyrics spoke of finding strength in each new dawn and offering kindness like seashells on the tide. When the final note faded, I held my breath, waiting for the applause track cued by Marissa. But instead I heard silence, as though the world had paused to listen. Then softly, the engineer clicked a button and the station's signature chime heralded our live broadcast. Words of praise poured in through the station's call-in line. "That child has the voice of an angel. I'm donating to the Children's Hospice right now. Please play it again." The host pledged that all royalties from the segment would go to Riley's charity fund. As we packed up to leave, Marissa hugged us both. "Morgan, you and Riley have reminded all of us why radio still matters," she said, tears in her eyes. Driving back north through the winding roads, Riley pressed her head to my shoulder and said, "Dad, I want to keep singing for kids who need help." I smiled, my chest full. "And we will, sweetheart, wherever your music carries us." In the weeks that followed, our small company, Light in the Dark, expanded its mission. With the proceeds from the radio session, we organized a series of mini-concerts in neighboring towns, each one raising funds for children's non-profits across the Pacific Northwest. Through each new performance, I watched Riley's confidence blossom, her spirit unshakable and her heart ever generous. And though every new horizon held its own challenges, I knew that together we could navigate them, guided always by the melody of hope she carried within. By midsummer, we were riding a tide of momentum I could scarcely have imagined a year earlier. After the Cascade Public Radio session, Cascade Arts Foundation invited Riley to headline their annual Voices of the Coast Gala in Seattle, a black tie event attended by philanthropists, CEOs, and cultural luminaries. The gala's theme that year was Healing Through Music, and the foundation wanted Riley to open the evening with Waves of Hope. They offered to cover travel, accommodations, and a modest honorarium, $4,000 to be split between our Light in the Dark Fund and the Teen Music Mentorship Program in Lincoln Bay. When I told Riley, her face lit up like the neon sign on Pike Place Market at night. She hugged me fiercely and whispered, "Dad, this is our chance to reach even more hearts." I knew she was right, but a knot of anxiety tightened in my chest. Seattle's grand venues, the polished crowd. I worried it might be too much, too soon for her tender soul. Still, I forced a confident smile and spent the next week organizing every detail, booking our ferry and train tickets, selecting a navy blue frock coat for her to wear, coordinating with the foundation's event planner, and scheduling a rehearsal at Benaroya Hall's sound booth. On the morning of our departure, Driftwood Cove greeted us with a brilliant dawn. Seagulls wheeled overhead as we drove to Port Angeles. The ferry ride was as serene as a painting. Riley hummed her melody, notebook in hand, scribbling notes about stage lighting and acoustics. I felt both pride and protectiveness welling up inside me, pride that my daughter's gift had grown this far, protectiveness that it not be tarnished by the glare of elite scrutiny. We arrived in Seattle by late afternoon. The city's skyline gleamed in the golden light, glass towers reflecting the salmon-pink sunset. The foundation had arranged for us to stay at a boutique hotel near the waterfront, where the concierge greeted us by name and whisked our luggage away. That evening, we met with Marissa Chen, now a close family friend and the gala's co-producer, who gave us a tour of the historic auditorium. At the centre of the stage stood an upright grand piano and a lone microphone on a gleaming stand. Rows upon rows of velvet seats faced us, and the chandeliers above glittered like suspended galaxies. Back in our hotel room, as Riley prepared her sheet music on a small desk, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I answered, expecting another logistics inquiry, but instead heard my mother's trembling voice. "Morgan, please," she began. "We're in real trouble again." My heart sank. "The bookstore." "This time, the landlord has served an eviction notice. We have until the end of the month to vacate. We don't know where to go." I stared at the phone, my mind racing. My parents had burned through our last conversation like driftwood in a bonfire. How could they ask for help again?
I felt my anger flare, memories of their dismissal of Sage's gift surfacing with vivid clarity. Yet Eliza's gentle voice, a voice I had vowed to protect, whispered in my mind, compassion, always.
"Mum," I said, my tone measured, "I'm in Seattle with Riley for an important performance. I can't make promises I'll regret. But here's what I'll do. I'll contact a housing counsellor back in Driftwood Cove and help you find affordable options. I'll write you a cheque for 1 month's rent, provided you commit to a business plan and counselling to keep the store afloat. No more bailouts." Her sobs crackled through the line. "Thank you," she whispered. "I understand." I hung up, exhaling hard. Turning to Riley, who peered at me with concern, I forced a reassuring smile. "All right, sweetheart," I said, smoothing her hair. "We'll look after Grandma and Grandpa, but only if they learn to stand on their own feet." Riley nodded, her eyes solemn in that moment, wiser than her years. Then she picked up her recorder and rehearsed a few bars of Waves of Hope as I straightened my tie in the mirror. The next evening, stepping onto that Seattle stage hand in hand with my daughter, I felt the fusion of all our journeys, the ache of loss, the resilience of love, and the unbreakable bond between us. Before she raised the recorder to her lips, I whispered, "This is for you, for me, for Sage, and for everyone who needs a melody of comfort." Then the lights dimmed, the spotlight found her, and in the hushed splendor of Benaroya Hall, Riley played the first note and carried us all on a wave of hope. After the gala in Seattle, the cascade of new opportunities felt like a rising tide. Offers arrived from NPR affiliates, regional festivals, and even a renowned children's hospital in Spokane, asking if Riley could perform Waves of Hope at their annual benefit. Yet amid this excitement, my promise to help my parents weighed on me. Their bookstore, The Hidden Chapter, had stood for 20 years, my childhood sanctuary and the scene of so many painful memories. I resolved to keep my word, but carefully. Returning home to Driftwood Cove, Riley and I settled into our familiar routine: morning beach walks, museum shifts for me, art coaching sessions for her with Miss Harper. But evenings now included phone consultations with housing counsellors, business mentors, and small business loan officers. My parents, nervous at first, met every requirement, drafting a lean budget, agreeing to bi-weekly mentorship meetings, and working with the town's Small Business Association to diversify inventory. I wrote them a check for 1 month's rent, but on the condition that I attend quarterly reviews and that they place my granddaughter's musical awards on a special shelf in the shop's front window as a reminder of commitment to community and family. As July turned to August, each rehearsal with Riley felt both like magic and a duty. We practiced on the back porch, her recorder carrying across the dunes, while I pored over balance sheets and marketing plans. One afternoon, After a particularly focused session, Riley ran to me, her cheeks flushed.
"Dad," she exclaimed, "I want to organise a concert here in Driftwood Cove, right on the pier, to raise funds for the bookstore and the children's hospice." My breath caught.
Hosting an outdoor pier concert would require permits, sound equipment, and promotion. It was ambitious, but for Riley's passion, I would move mountains. Together, we sketched out a plan. We'd host Melodies by the Sea on a Saturday evening in early September, inviting local musicians, Sage's former art students, the Driftwood Cove Cornet Band, and even old Ben, who offered to play sea shanties on his accordion. The event would feature Riley opening with Waves of Hope, followed by a community open mic, and conclude with a collaborative finale. Proceeds would split, half to help my parents' rent and store renovation, half to sustain the Coastal Children's Hospice. We spent the next 2 weeks in a whirlwind of activity. I applied for a special event permit from the town council, reminding them of our previous fundraisers, and negotiated a modest fee waiver. I rented sound gear through Tom's contacts at the museum and printed flyers featuring Riley's photo under the pier lights. My parents rearranged the bookstore's schedule to stay open late, displaying a community concert ticket outlet sign in the window. When neighbours saw our flyers and heard our plans, they offered help. Scaffolding for the stage, homemade cookies for sale, lanterns to string along the railing. On the night of the concert, the sky blazed with sunset hues as families gathered on folding chairs along the pier. The waves lapped gently against pilings, and the air carried the mingled scents of salt water and sweetgrass. My parents, standing beside me, wore matching Team Hayes t-shirts and held buckets for donations. I felt their pride as they watched Riley step to the mic in her blue frock coat, the silver recorder gleaming under lantern light. She began with Waves of Hope, her tone unwavering, each note drifting across the water like a promise. The crowd hushed, moved by the sincerity of her music. When she finished, applause thundered, and my parents exchanged glances, tears shining in their eyes. The evening unfolded in joyous harmony. Local singers stepped forward, laughter mingled with melodies, and at the finale, every musician joined Riley on stage for a communal rendition of Amazing Grace. Lanterns floated out on the tide, as if the sea itself joined the celebration. By night's end, the concert raised over $2,500 for the hidden chapter and the hospice, far more than we dared hope. My parents hugged me and Riley, their voices thick with gratitude. I realized then that true support isn't bought with checks alone, but built through shared effort and faith in one another. As we packed up under a canopy of stars, I held Riley's hand and whispered, "You did it." She beamed, her recorder swung at her side like a talisman. In that moment, I felt the full circle of our journey, loss, love, renewal, culminating in a melody that united family, community, and hope. And I knew that together we could compose whatever future we dared to imagine. In the aftermath of Melodies by the Sea, Driftwood Cove buzzed with a renewed sense of unity. The bookstore's windows, now adorned with Riley's awards and a sign proclaiming "The Hidden Chapter, Proud Community Partner," stood as a testament to collective effort. My parents greeted each morning with renewed energy, my father meticulously restocking bestsellers, and my mother hosting impromptu poetry readings in the reading nook. Their small smiles for me and Riley, once so rare, now felt genuine, forged in the warmth of shared accomplishment rather than forced duty. Meanwhile, light in the dark grew beyond my wildest dreams. Invitations arrived to curate a children's benefit at the Bellevue Botanical Garden and to appear on a Seattle morning show. NPR correspondent Maria Valdez proposed a feature story on Riley's journey from a sandbox practice recorder to a beacon of hope for children in care. Each opportunity brought a fresh wave of excitement, yet also an undercurrent of protectiveness. I consulted each time with Miss Harper and with Sage's old mentor, Dr. Jonathan Price, to ensure Riley's schedule balanced performance with her childhood joys. One crisp September afternoon, the morning show team arrived at our home. The air smelled of turning leaves and the first hint of wood smoke from chimneys. Cameras set up by the front window, where Riley had painted sunrise over the cove, and microphones on boom stands framed the welcoming living room. I felt a tug of nerves, but Riley greeted the crew with her characteristic poise. She sat on the sofa, patting the space beside her. As I joined her, Marissa Chen, now our media confidant, smiled and said, "Ready?" Riley nodded, the recorder laid carefully on her lap. The segment began with me recounting her early practice sessions on the porch, the discovery of her gift, and the first boathouse concert. Then, as the microphone swung toward her, Riley played a gentle aria of her own composition, Shelter of Song, inspired by the seashell motif in her drawings. The hosts leaned forward, visibly moved, and the live audience applauded as soft chimes cued the transition to the next segment about community resilience. After wrapping the interview, I hugged Riley tight, whispering, "You were extraordinary." Her bright smile in response reminded me why we carried on. That evening, as the studio lights packed up, my phone buzzed with a call from my parents. I paused, my stomach knotting. "Hello," I answered. On the other end, my father's voice wavered. "Morgan, we lost our lease renewal for the apartment above the shop. We have to vacate in 30 days. My heart clenched in disbelief. Only weeks ago we had saved the bookstore. Now they faced homelessness. "Dad," I sighed, "we just got through this once." "I can't float you another bailout." My father cleared his throat. "We tried budgeting, we rallied customers, but rent hikes and slow sales." He trailed off. I closed my eyes, recalling how easily they had dismissed Riley's first gift. Compassion surged forward, tempered by caution. "Okay," I said, "here's what I can do. I'll pay for a month's rent, but only if you commit to subletting the apartment to help cover expenses, and if you work with the small business center to find new revenue streams, perhaps expanding the shop's online presence." No more blank checks. There was a long pause. My mother's voice quivered. "We understand." I hung up with a sigh, both heavy and resolute. I knew supporting them meant setting firm boundaries so they could stand on their own, as we had. The next day, I discussed the situation with Riley as we walked along the pier at dawn. The gulls wheeled lazily, and the tide's whisper guided our steps. "Dad," she said, adjusting her recorder strap, "we can hold another concert, this time at the bookstore. We'll call it Pages and Pipers." I laughed softly, ruffling her hair. "That's the spirit, sweetheart. Let's help Grandma and Grandpa again, this time with structure and shared effort." And so, in the soft glow of morning, we began drafting plans for Pages and Pipers. A cozy evening of readings and recorder solos inside the hidden chapter, with community storytellers, local poets, and Riley opening with Shelter of Song. We vowed to transform the very walls where I had once felt invisible into a sanctuary of creativity and self-reliance. United by melody and story, our family, 2 generations woven together, would chart a course toward resilience, ensuring that love, like music, always found its home. The Pages and Pipers event arrived on a crisp October evening, the golden light of dusk settling over Driftwood Cove like a benediction. My parents had transformed the hidden chapter into a cozy haven. Strings of fairy lights traced the ceiling beams, shelves were cleared to make space for folding chairs, and the scent of pumpkin spice from the cafe next door wafted through the open
front door.
A small wooden stage, a repurposed book cart, stood center, draped in a deep green cloth. I watched from the back as Karen and Randall welcomed neighbors, their smiles tentative but genuine. The store's bell tinkled with each arrival, poets carrying leather-bound journals, families with toddlers clutching cookie boxes, and retirees eager to hear Riley play. I slipped backstage behind a curtain of well-thumbed novels to check on Riley. She sat on a stack of soft cushions, her recorder in hand, and a notebook on her lap filled with new compositions. At 5 years old, she was younger than when she first played publicly, and yet somehow even more confident. She looked up, grinning. "Dad, I'm ready," she whispered. I nodded, my throat tight with pride. "You're going to be wonderful." The evening began with readings from local storytellers, tales of shipwrecked mariners and lighthouse keepers braving storms. Each story carried the hush of anticipation, reminding me of childhood nights in our living room, listening to my grandparents' sea-salted recollections. When the readings concluded, the store staff dimmed the overhead lights and spotlighted the little stage. Applause greeted Riley as she stepped forward, her backpack tucked beneath the stage as if a conductor's podium. She opened with Shelter of Song, her tone as gentle as drifting driftwood. The recorder's pure notes threaded through the rows of chairs, and the audience leaned closer, drawn into her melody. Then, without pause, she began a new piece titled Turning Tides, an original she'd written about facing change and riding its currents. Each phrase rose and fell like waves, capturing both the ache of uncertainty and the exhilaration of discovery. When she finished, the room exploded in applause, and I felt my father's hand on my shoulder, his eyes misty. After the solo, I invited community members to share short performances. Marianne, the librarian, recited a sea shanty in Latin. Jonah, the harbor's boatwright, played a mournful tune on his harmonica. And finally, my parents read a joint poem about a small bookstore that found new life in unexpected ways. Their voices, once stiff with formality, now carried warmth and conviction I had never heard before. When the final chord faded, we passed collection baskets, one for the Hidden Chapters Rent Fund, the other for the Coastal Children's Hospice. Neighbors stuffed bills and coins into both with generous hands. At the end, the tally showed $1,500 for the bookstore and $1,600 for the hospice. My mother turned to me, voice thick. "Morgan, we can't thank you enough." I shook my head. "Thank you for trying. This family finds strength when we work together." Later, as we packed up amidst the rising hum of conversation, I hugged Riley close. "You did it again," I murmured. She beamed, hugging me back. The store's sign glowed softly through the window, a beacon of our shared resilience. Outside, the tide gently lapped against the pier, reminding me that life, like the ocean, moves in cycles. We had weathered loss and neglect and sailed through storms of doubt and hardship. Now, with each concert, each story, each note, we charted a new course. A family united not by blood alone, but by love, by purpose, and by melodies that could heal even the deepest wounds. Winter swept into Driftwood Cove with biting winds and drifting snowflakes that glittered like stardust under streetlights, transforming our little town into a silent white sanctuary. As frost traced lacy patterns on the bookstore windows, I found myself juggling new responsibilities, managing Light in the Dark's growing online platform, teaching Riley remotely through her hybrid schooling program, and keeping the hidden chapters.
Newfound success from slipping through my parents' fingers.
Riley, now 8, adapted to the cold with her signature resilience. Bundled in a fuzzy blue coat, she would step onto the porch each morning to practice her recorder against the hush of snow, her breath forming tiny clouds as she coaxed out a warm,
hopeful tune.
One afternoon, in the glow of our living room lamplight, I answered a call from an agent in Nashville who had seen Riley's Turning Tides performance on YouTube. He offered a developmental recording contract, a chance to travel to Tennessee, record with seasoned session musicians, and release an EP under his boutique label. My heart thundered. The magnitude of Riley's talent had indeed reached far beyond Oregon's coast. Yet I remembered Sage's wish that Riley's gift serve others before profit, and the toll fame had already taken on my parents' sense of self. I tucked the phone beneath my chin and closed my eyes, considering the contract's fine print, an exclusive deal that would tie Riley's music to one company for years with minimal creative control for us. When I shared the news with Riley, she paused mid-note, and I watched her vibrant eyes cloud with uncertainty. "Dad, I trust you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I just want to help people." That moment crystallized my priorities. We drafted a respectful reply declining the exclusive contract, instead proposing a more flexible agreement that guaranteed Riley's artistic freedom, charitable royalties, and a commitment to limited touring so she could remain grounded in her childhood. The agent's reply came the next morning. He admired our integrity and agreed to terms that honored Riley's values. Relieved, I squeezed Riley's hand and promised we would proceed only if every step aligned with her heart. Meanwhile, school demanded attention. The hybrid model meant Riley logged into math classes from the piano bench, flipping between fractions and fingering scales while I monitored museum exhibit restorations via Zoom. In the quiet moments, I scrawled business emails, organized benefit live streams pairing local artists, and oversaw my parents' Etsy page showcasing rare volumes, ensuring their income diversified beyond the storefront. On snowy weekends, we held small gatherings in the bookstore back room, masked, distanced, where Riley led community carols singing sessions by lamplight, her recorder weaving through familiar melodies and original refrains inspired by winter's hush. Neighbors assembled tins of donated canned goods, which we delivered together to the Coastal Children's Hospice, our breaths visible in the crisp air as we walked the familiar route to the care center. In every note Riley played, in every shared loaf of bread, I saw how love multiplied when given freely. As the year closed and holiday lights reflected off pristine snowbanks, I realized that our family, once fractured by neglect and loss, had grown into something stronger, a small constellation of hearts bound by compassion and purpose. Together, we were composing a legacy far richer than any record deal, a testament to the belief that true success lies not in charts and contracts, but in the melodies we share and the lives we touch. The calendar flipped to January, and Driftwood Cove bore the weight of a long winter. Icicles hung like glass daggers from the eaves, and each morning the harbor lay silent beneath a mist that rose from the frigid water. Yet, inside our home, warmth radiated from the familiar rhythm of life I'd fought so hard to preserve. Riley woke before dawn, slipping into her robe and pad footing down the hallway to practice her recorder by our kitchen window. I brewed coffee, its steam fogging the glass, and watched her small silhouette moving in measured breaths, her melody threading hope into the quiet dawn. At 8 years old, she had grown more confident than I could have imagined, but she still sought guidance. After her morning practice, she curled into my lap at the kitchen table over oatmeal, her recorder perched on the plate's edge.
"Dad," she asked, her voice soft in the dim light, "do you think music can change someone's mind about kindness?" I paused, spoon halfway to my lips, and considered. "I believe it can," I said honestly. "When you play, you awaken people's hearts."
You remind them of shared humanity. Her eyes shone, and she nodded thoughtfully before launching into a gentle improvisation on the theme of sunrise. That week, I received word from the Nashville label confirming our revised contract. We would record an EP in March, 3 original songs, 2 traditional folk pieces, and a live session of Waves of Hope and Shelter of Song to benefit the Coastal Children's Hospice. The agreement ensured Riley's freedom to curate her repertoire, and 80% of royalties would fund charitable causes. I punched the air in quiet triumph, imagining how many life-saving services we could support. Yet, with gratitude came a familiar pang, the fear that our precious family equilibrium might shift again under the pressure of new commitments. To balance work and nurture, I revised our schedules. Mondays and Wednesdays became museum-only days. Tuesdays and Thursdays were dedicated to remote schooling and music coaching, and Fridays were reserved for family evenings, hot chocolate, board games, and impromptu recorder jams by the fireplace. On weekends, I continued overseeing my parents' bookstore and Etsy shop, but they had grown more self-reliant, managing order fulfillment and hosting safe, small book swap gatherings that kept the store's door gently swinging. One afternoon in mid-January, a knock at the door revealed old Ben, the retired sea captain, with his accordion strapped across his chest. He grinned beneath his wool cap. "Morgan, I heard you and Riley are charting a course for Nashville," he said, his voice like creaking rigging. "I've got something for you." He reached into his weathered jacket and pulled out a small wooden music box carved with a lighthouse motif.
"Thought you two might need a keepsake for safe passages," he explained, winding it to let a tinkling melody fill the entryway. Tears pricked my eyes as I accepted it, and Riley hovered close, her gaze filled with wonder. "Thank you," she whispered.
"We'll treasure it." That evening, as snow drifted lazily past our windows, I set the music box on the mantel above the fireplace. I held Riley on my knee and let the lullaby wash over us. In the flickering lamplight, I realized that our journey, once defined by loss and longing, had evolved into a beautiful testament to resilience, community, and unconditional love. Ahead lay the bright horizon of new adventures, recording sessions, concerts, and charitable initiatives across states. But nestled in the heart of it all was this moment, a father and daughter bound by trust, creativity, and the enduring melody of hope that would guide them through every storm. And as the music box wound down, its final notes lingering like breath on the sea, I knew we were ready for whatever waves lay ahead. March arrived with a promise of change as the grey of winter gave way to the first tremors of spring. Snowdrifts receded, revealing new shoots of grass along the dunes, and the harbour roused from its frozen slumber. For Riley and me, this month marked our journey to Nashville to record her debut EP at Bluebird Studios, a historic space where legends had laid down tracks. I packed our cases with recorder reeds, sheet music, and the silver microphone inscribed "Riley My Light," while Riley carefully placed her favourite ocean-themed drawing into her journal for inspiration. Our flight from Seattle to Nashville was filled with wide-eyed wonder. Riley pressed her face to the window as we soared above snow-dusted mountains, and then endless plains waking beneath patchwork fields. She hummed the melodies we would record, refining every pause and subtle inflection. I listened from the aisle seat, heart swelling with pride and anticipation. At Bluebird Studios, we were greeted by studio engineer Marcus Lane, whose calm confidence and encyclopedic knowledge of acoustics put us immediately at ease. The recording room was spacious, with golden oak walls and vintage microphones perched like sentinels. Musicians from local session groups, strings, upright bass, acoustic guitar, filed in, greeting us warmly and admiring Riley's tiny stature beside the grand piano. Our first session focused on Waves of Hope. Riley stood in the center of the room, her recorder held firm. I joined her at the grand piano to provide gentle accompaniment. With a nod from Marcus, she began. The first measures floated perfectly through the microphones. Each session took multiple takes, but Riley's mastery shone through as she refined her phrasing under the producer's encouraging guidance. At one point, Marcus leaned across the console and whispered, "She's channeling something timeless." I nodded, tears in my eyes. Next came Shelter of Song. The addition of soft string harmonies added depth, and as Riley played, I watched her small frame sway with the melody's ebb and flow. For her original commission, Turning Tides, Nashville's acclaimed guitarist Lila Thompson joined us, weaving intricate arpeggios around Riley's lines, creating a duet that felt both fresh and soulful. We recorded 2 traditional folk tunes, Danny Boy and Shenandoah, to honor the songs that first inspired Riley's gift. Between sessions, Riley explored the studio's wooden hallways, tracing her fingers over gold-plated records on the walls. She balanced on her tiptoes to peer at album covers featuring names once whispered only in my dreams. I watched her, marveling at how far she'd come from our living room practice corner. On our final evening in Nashville, the studio team invited us to a celebratory dinner at a nearby cafe. Over warm cornbread and sweet tea, they toasted Riley's talent and her commitment to charity. I raised my glass and said, "To my daughter, may your music always carry hope forward." Riley's cheeks glowed as she clinked her glass of sparkling cider against mine. Returning home to Driftwood Cove, our hearts buoyed by the studio's magic, we carried with us master recordings destined to become an EP, Light in the Dark, Melodies of Hope. In our living room, I set the USB drive beside the music box from Old Ben. We held hands and pressed play on our speaker. Riley's recorded voice filled the room, crisp, emotive, brimming with promise. As the final notes faded, she turned to me and whispered, "Dad, we did it." I smiled through tears and hugged her tight. "We did," I said, knowing that her journey was just beginning and that together we would continue to transform lives, one song at a time. Spring's tender green unfurled over Driftwood Cove, and with it came the release of Light in the Dark, Melodies of Hope. Our debut EP, 5 tracks woven from Saltwater Dreams and Resilience, dropped on all streaming platforms on a Friday. That morning, Riley and I sat side by side at the kitchen table, mugs of chamomile tea between us, watching the play count climb. Within hours, Waves of Hope had thousands of streams, each play triggering a donation of a fraction of a cent to the Coastal Children's Hospice Fund. Our eyes met across the table, and she grinned, tapping a finger on her recorder's silver logo. "We did it, Dad." Yet the true triumph lay not in numbers, but in the messages that flooded our inboxes. A teacher in Anchorage wrote that her students had performed shelter of song at their winter concert to comfort classmates facing family changes. A family in Austin sent a photo of several generations, from grandparents to toddlers, gathered around a speaker, their faces alight as they listened. And from the Children's Hospice in Lincoln Bay came a heartfelt note. Your music brings sunshine to days we thought lost to shadows. Each story stitched a new patch into our tapestry of purpose. With the EP's success, invitations tumbled in, benefit concerts at San Francisco clinics, a feature on PBS's Young Voices, and even a summer residency at the Oregon Coast Aquarium, where Riley would perform live among the otter habitat, raising
funds for marine mammal rescue.
Yet, amid the swirl of opportunities, I remembered the delicate balance we had forged, where childhood thrived alongside ambition. So we chose wisely. One major performance each season, a handful of intimate community events, and a quarterly charity livestream from our living room, with musical guests joining us via video to spotlight causes close to our hearts. At home, life settled into a harmonious cadence. Mornings began with dawn practices on the porch, afternoons flowed through school and museum exhibits, evenings were filled with laughter, board games and impromptu jam sessions where I tried, poorly, to keep up with Riley's inventive improvisations. My parents, newly established in their renovated store with apartment, graduated from probationary business plans to hosting author signings and local history seminars. Their pride in Riley's achievements became a reciprocal warmth, melting old resentments and weaving bonds renewed by genuine support. On June's summer solstice, we staged our first aquarium concert beneath the moonlight. The stage shimmered beside the otter tanks, where the playful creatures swished through the water as an audience of families sat rapt. Riley opened with her original tune, Turning Tides, followed by collaborative pieces with visiting musicians. As she played, I watched her small figure bathed in gentle spotlights, her music echoing in the water and hearts alike. When she finished, the aquarium's overhead speakers piped the sound of ocean waves, and a standing ovation broke softly across the boardwalk. That night, as we packed our recorder and folded our set list, Riley turned to me and said, "Dad, I want to write a song about finding family in unexpected places." I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Then let's begin tomorrow," I replied. Years from now, I know her voice will carry across stadiums and screens, and my role will evolve into her proud advocate, ensuring her integrity and childhood remain intact. But tonight, in the hushed glow of the aquarium, it was enough to be a father and daughter united by melody, standing on the threshold of all the chapters yet to be written, each note a beacon, each song a promise that love, like music, transcends every tide.